Hello, everyone. Welcome to Mining Now. I'm your host, Jerrod Downey. We've got another exciting episode of Mining Now coming your way. We're having Northisle Copper and Gold on. We're going to feature their CFO, Nicholas Van Dyke. Northisle owns the North Island project, which is located near Port Hardy, right here in BC. So excited to talk a little bit of local. We're also going to be covering things like Canada's $3.8 billion critical mineral strategy. So we're going to cover a lot of ground, talk about the project, talk about Canada's strategy, and what we're looking into for 2023. Before we do that, the heavy industry tour is almost set to take full swing. We're going to be at PDAC March 4th to 8th. And we're going to be at CIM April 30th to May 1st. We're going to be doing episodes all throughout the event and in some different locations, we think. So we're putting a lot together. If you're wanting to be featured on that show or advertised on that show, please let us know. Of course, our heavy industry tour is brought to you by Savinaw Equipment, I think our oldest sponsor. And we've got a new partner on board, Corporate Traveler. So there'll be links to both those companies in the description below. Okay, Nick, welcome to the show. Great to have you on.
Thanks, Jerrod. It's great to be here.
So you're the CFO of the company, right?
Yep.
And I realized last night as I was prepping for the interview, I haven't actually had a lot of CFOs on the show. So I'm going to get to pick your brain a little bit. What's sort of your background? How did you get from there to here?
So I grew up on a small farm in rural Ontario, went from there and took a business education and a science education at Wilfrid Laurier. Worked in banking for about 9 years, and then while I was in banking, it was always a goal of mine to get back into industry. And so one of the companies I had worked on as a banker was a company called Polaris Materials, which some of the people from Vancouver may know. They operate a quarry on Vancouver Island.
Mm-hmm.
So I got a job with them as their VP IR and Corp Dev, helped to advance that project. We ended up selling the company very successfully. It was purchased by U.S. Concrete, who then was purchased by Vulcan Materials, and we had actually had those two in a bidding war, and they wanted Polaris so much that they bought the entire acquirer of Polaris.
Because that's a huge asset, right?
Yeah, it's a huge quarry. It's I think it's now permitted for 8 million tons a year. It's one of the largest quarries in North America. I think top three, and it's right here in BC. It's a great operation. They operate in a really sustainable way. I was really proud to be part of that company, and that company operates on the north end of Vancouver Island. So got to know some of the people in the area. Got to know. The area really reminds me of where I grew up in Ontario. It's a rural area in many ways. There's differences as well, but it feels a lot like home to me. And so I had a connection there. And then when a friend of mine and now coworker Sam joined Northisle, first thing I did was email him and say, hey, I just saw that you had joined, and I'd really like to be part of it. So from that, I ended up at Northisle, and now I'm the CFO.
I just wanted to sort of step back into that banking world, because I was thinking as you were saying about it, is banking is, if you're if you're a welder, you've had probably lots of interactions with electricians. Everybody sort of understands each other's role within the industry. But banking is still this thing where it does sort of, most people haven't worked in banking. They've maybe gone into a bank, maybe got a few loans, all that sort of stuff.
Right.
But it's still this sort of separate world to a lot of people.
Right.
So I guess a really simple question is what did you develop out of that sector? What was it like working within that sector and now to come back out into this space?
Right. So investment banking and this is just the way I think of it. Different people see it in a different way, but investment banking is to companies what a real estate agent is to houses, right? So we're essentially we function as an advisor to the company. So, if you go to sell your house, you reach out to a real estate agent you trust. They tell you what they think your house is worth. They help you list it. They help you sell it, find a buyer, or they'll help you find financing if it's a house that you want to continue to live in, they'll connect you to a mortgage broker, things like that. So in some ways, that's what an investment banker does, but for entire companies. So we help figure out what the company's worth. We help figure out who might want to buy it, whether that's public market investors or other corporations, and then we help broker the transaction. So, at a very high level, that's essentially what an investment banker does. And it's very different from, say, a commercial banker. And a commercial banker would be somebody who helps a company find a loan package that works for them, a line of credit, treasury functions, so cash management, foreign exchange. So that's what a commercial banker does. So they do different things within that, the structure of a large bank.
What's the main skill set that you bring, or I'm sure there's multiple, what are the main skill sets you bring over to a company like Northisle specifically from that banking world?
Yeah, so from the banking world, we interact with investors quite a bit, institutional investors. Institutional investors in particular. So I bring a network with institutional investors. I bring a network with corporate service providers, so lawyers and accountants and things like that are important for the CFO job, because we need to be able to manage the risk and manage the finances of the company. So that's a big part of what I bring. Analytical ability, we spend a lot of time really breaking down the financial levers of a company. So how do we create value through structuring the company, adding debt or subtracting debt, adding equity, or finding different financing tools. Should we use a royalty to finance the company? And so we've been doing that process with Polaris, or Polaris.
Oh no.
We did this at Polaris, but we're also doing that at Northisle, is trying to figure out what's the way that we can fund our activities as a public exploration and development company in a way that's most efficient, right? We want to be efficient with our shareholders' capital. We want to make sure that we're guardians of that capital and we're not spending it inefficiently, but we also, when we need to get new capital, we need to do that in a way that keeps that cost of capital as low as possible, right?
At Corporate Traveler, their seamless combination of expert service and innovative booking tech means you have what you need when you need it. Mining companies need experienced agents who know how to get you to far-to-reach destinations with ease, who understand rotational crew travel, chartering, and so much more. And with an average tenure of 8 years, their agents are the best in the biz and are experts at managing all your mining travel needs. Have an emergency? They've got your back 24/7, anywhere, on any device. Don't get stuck with complicated and rigid travel options. Get it done with Corporate Traveler. Visit them at corptraveler.com. It's Canada's premier event for mining, metals, and materials professionals. The Canadian Institute of Mining, Metallurgy, and Petroleum will be hosting its annual convention and expo in May in the beautiful city of Montreal. The technical program will feature expertise from a wide range of leaders across industry sectors. Are you working on a project that others in the industry need to know about? Well, let them know. CIM is now seeking presentations on a variety of topics. You can visit them at convention.cim.org to learn more. Today on MNP's Question of the Week, we have Jim McAvoy. He is the Partner and National Director of U.S. Corporate Tax Services at MNP. Jim, as 2022 is coming to a close, are there any significant U.S. tax law changes that U.S. companies should be aware of?
Under the U.S.'s 100% bonus depreciation rules, companies are currently allowed to immediately deduct the full cost of qualified property in the year those assets are placed in service. Qualified property eligible for bonus depreciation are depreciable assets with recovery periods of 20 years or less, including machinery, equipment, and vehicles. Bonus depreciation is also allowed for qualified improvement properties such as interior upgrade to buildings. The 100% bonus depreciation begins to be phased out after 2022 and is reduced to 80% for 2023, 60% for 2024, 40% for 2025, 20% for 2026, and is eliminated for 2027 and beyond. This gradual phase out of bonus depreciation presents a planning opportunity for companies to accelerate their capital expenditure plans to ensure that they maximize the benefits of bonus depreciation. It is important to remember that it is not enough to just purchase the assets prior to December 31st, 2022. Those assets must also be placed in service before the end of the year to get the 100% bonus depreciation deduction.
Thank you so much, Jim. To learn more, you can contact Jim directly at jim.mcavoy@mnp.ca, or you can visit their website at mnp.ca.
What makes you decide to join up with a North Isle? I mean, it's so for some context to that question, the space is a challenging one. Now Canada, as I would say, finally, is really the federal government is really starting to get behind exploration, expansion into minerals. We're sort of finally getting it. But when you joined, was that all already in place, or so did you sort of see that the tides had turned in the favor of junior mining companies when you joined up with North Isle?
Yeah, I think I was probably a year or two early, but you know, I started in banking right at the front end of the last super cycle.
Oh, okay.
So in 2005, that's when I got my first banking job, and we went through 3-4 years of just wild growth in the mining sector.
Yeah.
And that was, you know, maybe not the start of the last cycle. It was probably about halfway through. It started really in 2002, 2003, and ran through to 2008. We had the global financial crisis, everything crashed, and then we had another 3-4 years of run. So the whole super cycle really ran through till about 2011. North Isle was actually listed at the end of that cycle, and they didn't get it public quickly enough, and so they weren't able to really ride that wave, right? So North Isle was idled for most of the last 10 years until 2020.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and so Sam and I got involved in 2020.
When you say Sam, is that Sam Lee?
Sam, the CEO.
The CEO,
yeah.
Sam Lee, yeah.
So Sam and I got involved in 2020, and really it was to revive the capital markets presence of the company, introduce it to new investors, and really find a way to advance the asset. And so, you know, why North Isle specifically?
Yeah.
The connection to the North Island, which, like I said, it feels like going home when I go up there. It's the opportunities and the challenges are very similar to where I grew up in terms of the people and the economy and things like that. The copper sector in particular has always been something that I've really been focused on. I prefer the bulk commodities to things like gold.
Yeah.
You know, it feels more real, more substantial. It's and then, you know, coming into what I thought was the start of the next cycle, and maybe it was a little early, maybe not. We had a couple of good years, and then we've had this pause over the last 6 to 9 months. But you know, I still think we're at the front end of what's going to be a massive cycle in copper. And
well, it's really unavoidable. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think there's anybody that doesn't realize how much demand there already is. Like, even a year ago, we were talking about there's going to be a demand, and I started saying, well, we should probably stop saying there's going to be a demand. I think we're here.
Well, copper's already the single largest metal in terms of industrial demand outside of iron ore, right? If you look at, there's a good chart on Visual Capitalist that shows the usage of different metals and how they relate to the green energy revolution, right? And everybody talks about lithium. Everybody talks about nickel. Everybody talks about cobalt, right? But you can't do any of that stuff if you don't have the transmission lines.
Yeah.
And so you already have the largest market, and copper market may not grow as much percentage-wise as those other markets.
Because it's huge.
Because it's already huge.
Yeah, right.
But the absolute amount of copper that you need to add is, think of needing to add Escondida 8 times a year, 8 Escondidas over the next 8 years to meet the growth in copper demand. Like, it's an immense amount of metal that's going to have to be produced, and you can't achieve it. There aren't 8 Escondidas out there.
Yeah.
So you have to look at, okay, so that doesn't exist. Where do we go to find that copper? And you can't substitute for it very well. The recycling capacity hasn't been built out to recycle the copper that exists, and a lot of it isn't available for recycling. It's sitting there in power lines, in wiring in cars and things like that.
Right, yeah.
You know, so you have to find new supply, and that means you have to look at mid-sized projects like the North Island project.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I think when we get to the right part of the cycle, companies like ours are really going to stand out.
Yeah.
They're easier to develop than mega projects like Santo Domingo or QB2, right? QB2 has been a huge capex inflation for tech, and I think the major mining companies have realized, well, we have to find more people to develop, 5 projects like North Island instead of one project like QB2, but maybe we don't have to have the A team, right? Or we can have or maybe we don't have to have the A plus team because it's a $6 billion capex. We can have the A team or the A minus team,
right?
And we can have 5 of those teams, and they can execute on these smaller, lower risk projects.
Yeah.
Northisle also stood out because when you look at the area where the project is, it's a past producing mining region. So the Island Copper Mine was owned by BHP before they found Escondida. It was their largest mine. It was the deepest mine in the world at one time, the deepest open pit in the world. And so there's power infrastructure, there's roads, there's a port, and all of these things still exist in the area. And that provides us a really great foundation to develop a new project.
I want to talk a little bit about the project itself. What's the sort of the geography, the setup? Can you just sort of unpack that part of it?
Sure. So the North Island project is a 50-kilometer porphyry belt. So we have a series of, I think now 7 or 8 different occurrences that extend from the Island Copper Mine, the past producer in the area, all the way to the northwest end where we butt up against a wind farm. So along that belt, we have the Hushma deposit and the Red Dog deposit. Those have existing resources, and we completed a PEA on Hushma and Red Dog in 2021. And then we have several other targets where we're doing advanced exploration work where we think there's the opportunity to find additional potential deposits. Probably the most exciting of those is the Northwest Expo target, at least in the short term, because what we found at Northwest Expo through some drilling last year was that there's a gold-enriched zone. It's still a copper porphyry, so still a copper critical metals exploration project, but there's a zone that's got a much higher gold grade than anywhere else on the property that we found. And so we think we have the opportunity, and we've put this out in a press release, we think we have a 40 to 50 million ton opportunity there to define a resource, and we're doing the drilling in 2023 to do that.
That project, the drilling program is starting in 2023?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, to do the resource definition. We've already got 9 drill holes between historical drilling and the work we did last year. But we're going to put, I think, 5 pads and 8 holes in there, and the plan would be to define the resource this year. So that's interesting because if you can imagine, we already have a plant site sort of roughed in. It's a PEA, so it's not the final design, obviously, but if you can take that much higher grade material and put it into the front end of the economic model, you really change the economics of the project in a positive way. So that's a really important near-term focus for us. In the longer term, we have a target called Pemberton Hills. Jack McClintock, the former CEO of Northisle before we joined, liked to compare Pemberton Hills to the Resolution deposit. Massive porphyry system. We believe it's copper mineralized. There's some little stringers that come up through the top of the system that tell us there's copper in there somewhere. But if you visualize the standard porphyry model, and this is getting into some geology, and I'll try not to go too deep.
Our geologist will not mind.
I don't want to get too far over my skis. I'm not a geologist. I can, as we talked about earlier, I can fake it a little bit, but. Think of we reference the Silito model for porphyry, and the lithocap is a key part of that model, and it tells you that's the top of the system. And that at Pemberton Hills we have a massive 6-kilometer long by 1.5 kilometer thick lithocap, which tells us that the system that existed was large. We think it was long-lasting and energetic, and so what we need to do is to find the part of it where the copper is likely to have been deposited. So we did a geophysics program late in 2022. The results of that are coming out in the coming weeks here, I think that'll be pretty exciting because together with some historical work in terms of surface sampling, geochemistry, and other mapping that we've done, we think we'll be able to paint a pretty compelling picture about what that target looks like. And then we have some other smaller targets that are at earlier stages on the property, but that's the property in a nutshell. When you look at it as a development project, even just with the Hushima and Red Dog targets, we've got $1 billion plus NPV. The IRR after tax is almost 20%. A lot of early stage companies will kind of pull funny business with the number and say, "Oh, our pre-tax IRR is 20%." Well, you always have to pay tax, so our after-tax IRR is very good. So it's the kind of project where, if you had the money, you would and could build it today. But we think we can make that better with the addition of Northwest Expo in particular. That higher grade will increase the cash flow earlier in the mine model, which would then increase the IRR and make it a more economically attractive project.
When we're talking about developing new projects, especially in British Columbia, and we've been doing more episodes like out of Australia now. They've got the same sort of setup where these Indigenous groups are around the areas, and rightly so have a huge stake in what is happening there. And you're one of the companies, I would say, we've had companies on that are in talks, and they as far as they can tell, they're having really good conversations. so good on them. And we had some companies on Ontario that I think they're doing it really well, but they're still in the process. I think you've got an agreement signed. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. It's an early stage agreement, so
right.
it's not the end of the line. I would say, and Chief Tom, the chief of the Quatsino First Nation, said himself, it's a good first step.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, I copied his quote. This represents a good first step and sets a strong foundation for our relationship.
That's right. And so, I think it does a couple things. It provides the nation with funding so that they can address capacity issues within their own structure, and it also provides a clear process and pathway for us to consider the work that we're going to do in their territory, and both whether the short or long-term impacts of that work.
Yeah.
I can say in the 2 years that I've been at the company, they've been, I think, very constructive. I think the relationship has grown. We've really focused on it being a people-to-people relationship, and obviously the nation and the company have to build a relationship as well. But I think it's really important to have the relationships on a personal level as well.
Clerio custom creates 3D and immersive experiences, presentations, and apps. Use this amazing technology to promote projects or products, communicate plans and outcomes to stakeholders, train your employees and customers, hold virtual meetings around the world with your project's data. For infrastructure, environmental, and industrial projects, Clerio's expertise converts your spatial data into holographic 3D scenes, or full applications that tell your story in a compelling and intuitive way. It's time to join the metaverse for the real world. Learn more at clerio.studio. Fender Dunlop Usflex belts are engineered to withstand the harshest applications, delivering benefits that solve customer problems via superior rip, tear, and impact resistance. Usflex are extremely strong and robust belts that are difficult to destroy, which is important for heavy-duty bulk material handling environments. Made in their very own North American manufacturing facilities, this revolutionary concept in straight warp conveyor belting is up to 3 times more impact resistant versus competitor belting. Usflex users use fewer belts per year, make fewer belt repairs and replacements, reduce or eliminate belt downtime, and improve employee safety. You can visit FenderDunlopAmericas.com to learn more about their premium Usflex conveyor belting. PowerZone carries a massive inventory of pumps, engines, generators, and compressors. However, they don't stop there. They combine imagination with world-class engineering. They detail the entire process to every customer. Their pump package testing facility ensures your equipment is landing on-site, ready to work. That is PowerZone. Start with inventory, develop with imagination, deliver with integrity, and it's all at powerzone.com. That is PowerZone.
So I want to jump in here for a second because you mentioned something about the personal part of the relationship with First Nations, and let me try to. I almost got to pick apart my own question here to try to get it right. There is the financial motivation when you're talking to them, and then there is the business case, and then for the community, ESG, and then there is the personal aspect of it, of looking eye to eye. Have you been involved in all three of those sort of buckets, and probably the ones that I'm missing?
Yeah, I think, in December, as we were finalizing the agreement and then starting to execute on some of the key pieces of that, I was up in Port Hardy every week. So I think that's a really important part of building a relationship is to be in a room with someone. You can do so much over Zoom, but to be in the room with someone, and
it's just different.
Yeah, it really changes the dynamic, and it's hard to. I think it's possible to maintain a relationship remotely. It's much harder to build a new relationship remotely, right? You really need that in-person interaction, and you need opportunities to just have little conversations with people outside of the formal structure of, say, a meeting, where you might do that on Zoom, and that's where you really build the personal relationships. I think the thing that we've kept at the heart of how we've approached building the relationship with Quatsino and the other nations is that they're people. They are the people who have lived on this land for longer than anybody can remember, and ultimately they're the stewards of the land, and they'll be there long after we're gone. And we need to keep that at the forefront of how we approach what we're doing, because if we, narrow our focus and we only really look at what we want to do without considering how it's impacted what's come before and what's going to come after, we're going to lose the most important pieces of what's happening. And so, learning about where their community is at today and where it's been and where they'd like to take it is as much a part of what we're doing as, conveying information the other direction about what we're doing, right? We want to understand where their community priorities are.
Yeah.
Where are areas that are important to them. We can avoid those in our mine development planning, right?
Right.
So having it being a two-way street is really important, and sharing information in both directions.
Something, and again, I'll take a swing at a different type of question, is building business relationships that need to be real, but they also need to move forward. That's a tricky thing, especially when you're going onto someone's territory and land. You're asking to develop this business relationship with them, but you're in person, and it's a different thing. We do it all day. You and I are sitting here talking, not because we bumped into each other on the street. It's there's a business happening.
Yep.
How do you? Let's actually go from you start your day. You've got this big meeting with the First Nations, and you're coming there, and you're sort of you've got a 2-3 hour journey to get there. What is sort of going through your mind, and how are you sort of planning out to one, build that relationship, bring the sincerity that you have, but also move everything forward and sort of lay everything out for a business case? That's a lot. It's a lot to pack in, especially if you maybe only are meeting for 1 hour.
Right.
So I'm just kind of wondering how you even prepare for it.
Yeah, so I think doing as much as we can to understand the community, to understand the cultural context. So we've as a company, we've done, one of the providers is a company called Indigenous Corporate Training. So we do the kind of standard training that everybody does to understand the context of First Nations in Canada. But then also, listening to elders within the community, and we're actually just starting that process as
I just want to jump back. So this is an organization that your team will actually go to, and they'll sort of educate you on certain elements?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And they'll work with many different companies. Western Forest Products is active in the area as well. So they've done training with Western Forest Products and many other forestry and mining companies throughout the province. So, that education is the first step,
Right.
because we have to understand the context to be able to understand how the relationship can be formed. So I think that's really important. And then just listening to people and listening to what their hopes and dreams and concerns and worries are.
Yeah. You said about the elders. Now that's sort of this next
yeah,
stage.
and so that's the next stage is, so we're in the planning steps for our first community meeting with the community as a whole, right?
Oh, this is coming.
Yeah,
okay.
so we're hoping to do that in 2023, and we're in the planning phase of that, and there's also going to be a process of listening to people outside of the large group community meeting and just understanding. I think that companies that come into a community like the Quatsino First Nation or other First Nations and start telling before they've listened are the ones that you see have challenges.
Yeah.
And that's not to say we won't have challenges, but I think that our focus on listening and trying to really understand, where the community's at, where the nation is at, and understanding the context of the relationship. It's not, you said it's a business relationship. I don't actually think of it that way. We're engaging with a government, and it's a government that has that's got a territory in a certain part of the world.
Yeah.
And they have all or many of the rights and obligations that a government has over that territory.
Yeah.
Right. Ultimately, they have the final disposition of what happens within that territory, and we need to approach the relationship that way.
Yeah.
They need to trust us. We need to trust them, and and there's economic elements of that, jobs and more importantly than jobs are sustainable businesses.
Yeah.
I think that's the old conversation was, we'll provide employment to your members, and I think that's an incomplete picture. It's not employment. It's using the opportunity of the mine to develop sustainable businesses that are going to last for that future period when the mine's no longer there.
Yeah.
Right. The Tahltan Nation is actually a really good example of doing that.
I'm drawing a blank on his name. I've interviewed him a couple times. The old chief from there, amazing guy. Oh, I'm forgetting his name.
I don't remember the name of the old chief, but the Tahltan central government has done a really good job, in my view, of building sustainable businesses, and they have a drilling contractor that can go out and do drilling work.
Their story
anywhere,
is amazing.
right?
It's amazing.
So it's been a phenomenal story, and I'd love for Quatsino, and there's two other nations, that's Kwakwa and Kwakwa, to be able to tell that same story.
Right.
Right. I'd love for that to be the outcome of what we're doing here, because I think that's the real success. Is not just that we build a mine. Obviously, that's our focus. We're a mining development company. Yeah. But I think that the true success is that we've built a sustainable economy in partnership with the nations in the area and the local communities, and the BC government and everybody involved, that leaves something behind that everybody can be proud of. Right? I want to look back in my retirement and say, I helped contribute to that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's I was reading through, and then again seeing the quotes of the chief. It's like a case study on how to get. I think the chief nailed it. How to start a foundation.
That's right.
And he phrased it in a very smart way to go, this is just the foundation. We haven't built the house yet.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Like we're at a stage where, the agreement we have has a lot of features in it that we think will lend themselves to the next couple of agreements. Right. So from here, our next agreement would cover the development process.
Right.
Right, so the engineering and the environmental assessment and that sort of thing. And then ultimately you need to sign an IBA that defines the final economic structure and all that. But we've got this joint investment committee, or joint implementation committee, if you read the press release about it. The joint implementation committee is a structure that we think can continue on and will really be the vehicle for us to share information and build trust and make decisions jointly about our activities in the Quatsino Territory.
So switching gears a little bit, the critical mineral strategy that Canada is bringing forward, how much does that? I think that got announced. Well, you'd know the date. In my mind, it was like August.
Yeah, it was. No, it was. Sorry, the comprehensive strategy was announced in the fall, but there was kind of the high level strategy was actually announced back in April.
In April.
And so as they had some key pieces in the April budget. So one of those was the critical minerals exploration tax credit. So that's a extra 15% tax credit that's available for flow through financings for critical metals projects. And then they also announced the creation of they announced the dollar amounts of the $3.8 billion that was announced back in April. What we got in the fall was the detailed implementation.
Was it 15 or 30%?
So the existing exploration tax credit was 15%. So they added 15% on top of that.
Oh,
so
I see.
30,
30
yeah,
total.
It's 30,
Okay. Yeah.
30 total for critical metals.
Okay.
Yeah. So the plan that was announced by Wilkinson in the last couple of months here was the more detailed implementation. So that was the 50-page critical metal strategy that really will help that money hit the ground. Right.
Is that in real world scenarios? How much does that actually help a company like yours?
Well, I think it's going to come down to the implementation, right? So the tax credits already helped us. We were one of the first. Yeah, we were one of the first. I want to say one of the first 5 companies, I think, in Canada to take advantage of that new critical metals tax credit. So we did a flow through financing in June of last year, and we were able to finance at a really attractive share price relative to where we'd been trading because of the tax credit. It provides a good tax benefit to new investors. So that was already a powerful tool for us. The rest of it is as I said, it's going to come down to implementation. So how and where the infrastructure funding is allocated is going to make a big difference to how useful that is. Right? If it gets all sunk into one massive road that goes to one particular project area, it'll help those projects, but it might not help the nation as a whole.
Yeah.
So there needs to be a good process for having projects compete for that those dollars.
Yeah.
And that's part of what was defined in the strategy in the last couple months.
That tax credit, I wanted to just unpack it just a little bit more. Sorry, and I probably should know more about it, but so when it says it's for the exploration tax credit, you said, now are the investors also getting a tax? So is Northisle getting a tax credit and the investors are getting, how does that sort of structured?
Yeah, so the critical metals exploration tax credit, the federal one, is only for flow-through investors in a financing. So we can't claim it as the company. So if we went and spent normal equity on our own, we wouldn't be able to claim the credit.
I see.
So we can only use it if we go out and raise funding using a specific structure, the flow-through share structure. And we have to designate that we're going to spend the exploration dollars on critical metals exploration.
I see.
And then our investors who buy the shares in that offering can use the flow-through tax credit as a deduction on their own tax return, and they get an extra credit because we're a critical metals project.
So you're getting 100% of that flow-through. They're getting a 30% tax credit back to them then, right?
Yeah, or an additional 30%. The math very simply for us is, and these aren't the right numbers because our share price was different at the time, but let's say we were trading at 40 cents. The shareholders pay 60 cents for the share, and they get 20 cents worth of tax credit that they can use. That's the rough value.
Right.
Without the critical metals credit, they might only get 15 cents of credit, so they would have only paid us 55 cents for the share.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it basically means we can finance at a better price. And that's how we benefit.
Now, is that still happening, or is that phase of? So that's an ongoing thing.
Yeah, that's an ongoing thing. I believe it's active till 2027.
Okay.
So that'll be live for many years, and it's really to push. Right now, it's just targeted at exploration. So going back to the implementation question, we and a bunch of other industry participants contributed to a white paper that was submitted to Wilkinson via AME BC. And the white paper was targeted at finding ways to make the funding more efficient.
Yeah.
Because what we have right now is companies that are about to construct their mine have access to a lot of capital. There's royalty and streaming financings. There's project debt, right? And those are all tools that are available if you're ready to build a mine. On the exploration side, there's flow-through funding. That's what we used.
So
but
there's
this gap, right? So if you want to do all the engineering, there's not the funding is not as readily available.
Which again, that sort of ties back into this foundation that you've got with First Nations. Now there's this whole process, there's this gap where you need to build these relationships, outline everything that you're going to do. This huge part of the project.
Right, and so for a project of our size, right, and obviously, you know, we would do this in stages, but you know, the total cost to engineer our project and have it ready for a construction decision is probably north of $50 million, right? And so that's a big amount of money to raise. And right now, the tools for raising money in that part of a company's life cycle aren't as good as the tools on the bookends, right? So, you know, we think that's a really important piece of how they can make that critical metals funding more effective, is to really attack the development phase of a company's life cycle.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's so funny you say that that's happening in the mining and the exploration side, because in business, I've talked to my partner about this, is that in business, when you have an idea, you can get people to sort of pile in at the beginning. Then when you're the winner,
that's right,
you get people to pile in. And there's this gap when really you need the support the most, and you've proven that you've got something.
Yeah.
Way better than the initial.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's where you're sort of left in no man's land.
Well, and we think it's a special thing just for the mining sector. We call it the Lassonde curve, right? But if you actually look at it's true in a lot of other industries where, you know, selling an idea is easy, right? You don't have to prove it works yet. You just talk about your dreams, and there's a group of people that'll invest in that, right? But then the crunchy work of turning that idea into a buildable thing, I don't know, that's hard, and it takes a long time, right? So everybody just kind of goes, I'm not sure. Yeah. So, you know, I think that's probably one of the most important things that the government could do to make the critical metals push a success, is to really attack that development phase.
Do you think they're listening? Is like you said, this paper that you helped put together, is that? Do you think you'll be able to communicate that and get that understanding done? Because obviously, if it's just major projects that end up getting all the funding in that, it's not. I mean, we've got this chart up with all these. You know, I'll bring it up on the screen as well. I mean, all these projects that need to get underway, and I say need because, I mean, if you watch even a little bit of the news, you know, in Eastern Europe, some of the challenges that are happening, supply chain issues. I mean, the word need is now, it's not just economic advantage for Canada anymore. It's gone beyond that. Do you think you'll be able to communicate that as an industry to the federal government, who's sort of made this first step? Now, do you think they'll be able to sort of get it right in this gap?
I think so. I think in the industry, the conversation has started to focus on that. You know, certainly there were a number of companies that participated in the white paper that we submitted. It wasn't just us. It was us in partnership with some other BC-based companies. I understand that Teck and others have advocated for something similar, and it's really how do we de-risk that development phase, or how do we make the cost of capital more efficient in that development phase? Because, you know, if you spend exploration dollars, you can generate all the projects in the world. But if you can't bridge the gap and make something buildable, it's never going to happen, right? And the other piece of that phase is, in parallel, you have to do the engineering work, but you also have to have First Nations, who are a critical piece of the process, have to have the capability or capacity, we call it, to evaluate the work that's being done in their territory. Yep. And a lot of these nations are facing, you know, historical challenges that make that very difficult. And so we think there's an opportunity for the government to fund, you know, provide direct funding to nations in the areas of critical projects. The environmental assessment process has explicit funding that helps support nations to participate in environmental assessments. But again, there's this gap. So it's really left to the proponents to fund the nation's participation all the way from exploration right up till you formally enter the environmental assessment. And then some government funding comes in. So, again, making that piece, a little bit less reliant on the whims of the capital markets would make it easier for companies to push projects ahead.
I've done so many of these interviews, and it's funny, I've never had it outlined the way you're actually explaining it to me, and I'm sure there's other people listening, especially from a little, kind of on the fringes of the industry, that probably just don't realize that process.
Yeah.
This is one of those surprise conversations I'm glad we had. I wanted to talk. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say it's like all the business development people from the engineering firms that are listening to this. The more people that can help advocate for that support in the development phase of a project's life, the more work there's going to be for everybody, right?
Yeah.
Because that's the gap.
Yeah.
Right. That's the thing that's preventing a lot of these projects that are otherwise good projects from going ahead.
Yeah. I want to talk about just briefly about the attracting investors, and I have asked other people on the show before. What is it? FTX, is that the latest blow up in the Bitcoin space? We had the blow up in 2000 with the .com.
Yeah.
It's going to happen because it for sure, because like property, people are going to become more and more attuned to, there's a thing out there that they don't make more of.
Yeah.
It's a real asset. Are we there yet? Are you starting to see some of these investors starting to shift and want, companies like yours, they want to be on the ground floor, but they also want to be in during the heavy lifting part.
Yeah.
Are you seeing any shift? It is going to happen. It's a matter of when. But are you seeing it yet?
Yeah, I think so. We started to see it in 2020 and into the middle part of 2021 for sure. It was starting to move along into the middle part of 2022, and then we had the central banks kind of really clamp down, crank up interest rates, which increases financing costs for everybody.
Yeah.
So everybody kind of went, wah.
Yeah.
Not sure yet, right? Because mining takes a ton of capital.
Yeah.
So increase in the cost of financing means that it's harder to justify a mining project. Where I think we're at now is that people are starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel on the rate increases, which means that they start to visualize, okay, well, maybe in 12 months from now we'll start seeing rates go down, and then we'll be able to see these things starting to get built. So I think we're getting there. And I think the other thing that's going to happen for this sector to really sing is, I think the smart money should be trying to get in now, because when we really are going to take off is when the generalist investor, the retail investor, the people that don't know anything about mining but are like, I want to support the green energy revolution. How do I do that? And they'll go hunting for companies that look inexpensive and learn about the sector. So, I think the smart money is doing the work now. Right, we had Michael Gentili invest last year, followed up on it. He's a name that some of the retail investors that might listen might know, but he's a positive and supportive investor. So the smart money is coming in now, and it's an opportunity for people to get ahead of that wave of, a year ago I would have said the Robinhood investors, right? That Robinhood platform where it's just this crazy horde of retail people that just pile into stuff. Robinhood's having trouble, but that phenomenon still exists, and the generalist investor is going to come back to mining.
Yeah. And
when that happens, that's when things are really going to go.
Yeah, and in that space, that retail space, things trend. Like I think, I didn't actually read the book. I think it was like Rich Dad, Poor Dad. They talk about like land assembly and assets and things like that. And that all of a sudden got a whole bunch of people looking at the housing market, and that into different. They just didn't need. People were thinking, how that's like my mom and dad bought a house back in the day, and all of a sudden, I remember all my friends, were talking about it. I was like, well, okay, it's if we're all getting in on the same time, then of course I start to pull back. But it does seem like that's going to come. And what I wanted to, do you ever think though? Just to throw this out, and I'm going to put my marketing cap on for a sec. Do you think sometimes that the mining industry, though, is going, rather than showcasing it as a green a green solution, as a leader in green development, they're still doing it like, oh, look, we've got this project and we check all the boxes. You know, they're not quite, they haven't quite branded it for what almost what it is yet. Is it's actually leading the way.
And that's actually what I was going to say. Is I think the mining industry actually does a better job of respecting Indigenous rights, incorporating carbon impacts, and developing projects in a really robust way now. They didn't always in the past, but I think in 2023...
Right, it's sort of that legacy that they've still kind of... It's almost like they're carrying it with them.
That's right, and so I think the industry as a whole is still defensive of that legacy, and so that comes through in the way that we brand ourselves. But I think in actuality, the mining industry does it better than almost any industry in Canada in terms of being really conscientious about impacts. And part of that is that the legislation has forced us to, in reaction to some of the issues in the past. But part of that is that the industry as a whole just has a really constructive attitude. And my generation of people in the mining industry are as we're doing, are starting with a focus on Indigenous relations.
And it's a sincere focus, because I get to talk to, my running joke is that I have best friends for 2 hours at a time doing this show. But I do get to talk to people before the shows and after the shows, so I get to see the off-camera version as well. And the sincerity is real. And I wouldn't get recorded saying this on camera if I wasn't seeing it. It's real, and on top of that, I'm also seeing, if let's say I go to an event, and you see that person that still's kind of got that bad attitude toward Indigenous groups and things like that, just that thing, you can just almost see people just back away, like, no, we don't want any part of this. Whatever you're even like hinting at, we do not want to hear it.
Yeah,
and that's a great thing for the industry. And sure, I mean, legislation, people, if you didn't have speeding limits, people would just fly. So it's sometimes legislation. But then that legislation also attracts people like yourself who genuinely want to work within that system.
Right.
And so I think it's becoming genuine. And I guess that's my opinion, Art. Are you seeing it in the same way that I'm, through my lens, doing these shows? But you're kind of on the ground. Are you seeing it as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think the industry as a whole needs to do a better job of presenting itself as the green solution.
Kind of shedding that thing that they're still dragging around.
We need to not be as self-conscious about what was done in the past. We have to be aware it exists. It's going to be a question, right? It's going to be a thing we have to not defend but address. I think a lot of our conversations with Quatsino have started with, we understand what was done in the past, and we're not going to do it that way.
So when you were in talk, were they bringing it up as well?
Yeah, so they're focused on protecting the legacy of their territory. I think in the past there's a view that mining could have probably contributed more to the nation, and we're being really upfront. Our intention is for us to do that. It's to ensure that they benefit both in the immediate term and in the long term from our activities, and so we're attacking it head on.
It is an exciting. It's almost like the mining industry is in this sort of this. Like you said, interest rates, them going up and all that sort of thing. So for this next year, though, what is sort of your plans for your role within the organization, but then also as a company? What's sort of the plans?
Right. So I think I said it earlier on, is we're the guardians of our shareholders' capital. So we need to be efficient in how we spend it. So that means being really thoughtful in how we execute on our exploration program to spend the money we raised last year. But it also means, how do we finance the next stage of our growth in as efficient and inexpensive a way as possible? What's the lowest cost of capital option to do that pre-feasibility study, to do the environmental impact assessment, to do the baseline environmental work, to do the baseline community and socioeconomic work, because we need to understand all of that context before we consider proposing a mine for development here. So how do we raise that funds? That's what keeps me up at night. That's what I think about every day at work is, can we pull this lever or that lever, and what are the different tools that we have available to us.
Yeah, is it fun still?
Yeah, it's always fun.
Is it? Has it been a learning curve? Just before we wrap up, you worked for. I saw some of the banks. I was on your LinkedIn, so I saw some of the banks you've worked for. I think TD and another major one. I can't remember. BMO.
Yep.
And then you worked for a big quarry, and now you're in that junior mining space. Of course, going into it, you would have known of the space, but. Has it been a learning curve coming in?
Yeah, I always had more of a preference for the juniors, right?
Yeah.
I find that if you work at a big company, you end up doing a really narrow thing a lot, right? And that's not how my brain works.
And now you're on here doing media talks.
Well, that's it, right? Like I always do better when I have a wider scope, right?
Yeah.
Or a wider.
And you're always
pulling different pieces in, pulling people together, pulling our team together. Right, so for me, that's the part of it that I enjoy the most, is pulling our team together and getting people walking in the same direction, and building the relationships and building the relationship with Quatsino and with the people of Port Hardy and with with people around the province that are all stakeholders in what we're doing. So that for me is what brings me energy out of it, and so I
and keeps you up at night at the same time.
And keeps me up at night, right? Because it's it takes years to build meaningful relationships, and you can kill them overnight.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Wrong word said, wrong look, wrong eye contact. So I said something dumb on this podcast, right? Like there's all these different things that you're just constantly churning. Am I saying the right thing? Am I thinking the right thing? Am I approaching this problem the right way? And it's just a wonderful, beautiful, terrible problem and process to be in.
Yeah, and it's and once you do it long enough, you go, but what else? You can't imagine going into that little narrow stream anymore. It'd just be like you'd sit there and go, this is so boring.
There's so few things like this in the world.
Yeah.
It's such a beautiful, like I said, just a crazy sector to be in, and there's not a lot of other things like it. I love it.
It's the beginning of an exciting time, and I think this one, when it hits, I think it's going to be a very long-lasting one, because the world is not all of a sudden going to go, okay, well, we don't need copper anymore and things like this. It's going to just build and build.
Yeah, well, I think it was before we were recording, but we were talking about the world needs 8 million tons per year of incremental copper production by 2030. That's 8 Escondidas, and there aren't that many Escondidas left in the world to be found. So people are going to have to move down the market. The majors are going to have to think about how they efficiently develop mid-sized projects and even smaller projects. And I think that's where something like Northisle and North Island really are going to stand out. And that's what we're positioning ourselves for, is when that happens. Not if, but when.
But when. Nick, thank you very much for being on the show. We hope this is this is sort of us joining you for this. So our start to following you with the story, and hopefully we get to do it again and kind of stay updated.
That's great. Thanks, Jerrod.
Thank you,
really
sir.
Appreciate it.
And thank you, everybody, for watching. Great to talk to Nick. Again, they're trading the TSXV at under NCX. That's Northisle Copper and Gold. Thank you, everybody, for supporting the show. Thank you to all our sponsors, especially our travel sponsors, getting us all over the world, Savannah Equipment and Corporate Traveler. We will see you on the next episode of Mining Now.